Alrighty guys, thanks for clicking on today's video, and today we'll be talking about every single enchant in Deepwoken. I really appreciate the support y'all have had on my last video, and just in general. Some of these enchants are absolutely insane. Stick around to the end so you can learn about every single enchant, and with that, let's get on to the video. So starting off with our first enchant, we have Astral. Covered in this like purple star effect. This is on an Ebon Spear hand axe. It does two things. It does 20% more damage in PvE, and upon 3 parries, flourish, or critical, drops down this little star that does a set amount of damage in PvP, 3%, or 100 PvE damage. Pretty simple, mainly used for PvE, very good for PvE. So next up we have Blazing, which is covered by this orange flame effect, and after a few consecutive hits, depending on how the size of your weapon, it will apply flame onto the target. The flame will be blue if you have blue flames, black if you have black flames. The flame applies for 5 seconds. Pretty simple, does 8 damage per second for 5 seconds. Pretty solid. Okay, so next we have Chilling. It has a few main effects. First off, it's normally light blue, but because I have Crystallization Path, it becomes kind of this red color. Base does 4% more damage on each hit, and after hitting a target a few times, depending on what variety of weapon you have, it applies a freeze effect. Because I have Crystallization, it applies these shards, but if you had normal ice, it would just apply a blue freeze effect at the end of a few hits. So next we have Deferred, which makes the weapon black and applies yellow and red particle effects. What this enchant does is it makes you deal slightly more damage and spreads out the damage you deal over 2.5 seconds. Like that, so his health's just going down. Once you apply this effect, the damage taken from it cannot be avoided. Next up we have Detonation, which makes it look really orange and bright and has these little like bright balls. What it does is after a few consecutive hits where you see the charging up effect, it does a detonation explosion. It bypasses armor, not affected by damage multipliers. The good thing about this is that the explosions can execute if your opponent is too low on health. Next we have Elastic, which on hit applies a pink string that just drags your opponent towards you. It just prevents them from running away. Pretty simple. So for Gluttony, what it does is on hit, I steal a little bit of hunger and a little bit of thirst from my target. Hunger bar, thirst bar. So on his screen, you'll see it go down, and on my screen, you'll see it go up. It makes it covered in this like dookie looking effect. See, it just steals a little bit of hunger, a little bit of thirst. Not that much, but it can be annoying to fight against in long fights. So what Grim does is every few hits, depending on what weapon type you have, it applies these little bubbles, and those bubbles make you deal 20% more damage for 6 seconds from all attacks. So that can be mantras, attacks from other people, M1s, criticals, anything. And with this enchant, your weapon is covered in this. It makes your weapon black, and it have these black and red particles emanating from it. So there is no clip for the Harrowing enchant. That's because it is dang near impossible to get. So instead of using the Harrowing enchant, I'm just going to explain what it does. It makes your opponent's health bar, hunger bar, and all of their like item bars, so they see what their stats are, makes them all get blurred out and become unreadable. Really a bad enchant, especially considering how hard it is to get. 0 out of 10, would not recommend. What Heroism does is it makes you deal more damage if you're at either really high health or really low health. It's a bit complicated on how it works exactly, but it's not that great of an enchant. I wouldn't recommend using it personally, because you're usually just going to be at a mediocre amount of health in most fights. And if you're using it for PvE, you should just be using Astral at that point. What this enchant does is it makes the weapon be yellow and have these little like ovular shapes emanating from it. What Metal does is on hit, it steals a little bit of your opponent's armor. So on hit, he loses a little bit of armor and I'll gain a little bit. So I gain like 3% there and like 3% there. It works on PvE, but not that well, since if some enemies don't have armor, it doesn't steal armor from them, and it doesn't scale wouldn't recommend using it in general, really. It's not that great. Next, we have Nemesis, which Nemesis, on hit, applies this eye effect that it also covers the weapon in. It covers the weapon in like this dark pink mist and these little eye effects. And what that eye effect does is it replaces your critical, or Nemesis in general replaces your critical, with a teleport attack that teleports you to any opponent within a certain radius for that has the eye on them. These eyes last for about 15-ish seconds, so if you wait too long, they'll disappear. Pretty strong enchant all around, really good for PvP, not very good for PvE. Next up we have Obfuscation, which makes the weapon like see-through but not completely invisible. It just increases chip damage, depending on what type of weapon you have. Chip damage just means that when you block the attack, a percentage of the damage will still go through. So if my test subject will block, as you see, I still deal damage to him. Still deal damage. Still deal damage, even though he's blocking. The chip damage from this is not affected by anything. The details of this enchant are a bit complex, but what it does is just make you deal more chip damage. So this next enchant is Providence Thorns, which makes the weapon completely white, except for the handle, and have these little ovals appear around it that are also white. What this weapon does is it deals damage back to the opponent depending on parries. So if my test subject will attack me, so that little X that's about to appear on him deals damage to him. The details are a bit precise, but for PvP it deals 4% damage and ignores the opponent's resistance, and for PvE it does just a ton of damage. This enchant is all around really strong. Way better for PvE, but decent for PvP. Next up we have Sear, which makes the weapon golden and have like particles around it. There's lots of weapons or enchants with this effect. But what Sear does is it increases pin, which is how much your attacks go through your opponent's armor. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially just makes them have less armor effect. I mean, decent enchant, really wouldn't recommend using it though. If you needed a base enchant, I would just use Deferred. Sear also makes your opponent lose thirst. It's decent, I'll give it that. Next up, we have Solar, which applies a similar effect, but with like these little like strands going away from it. It's kind of weird. What it does is it steals ether and applies a solar mark. I don't really know what it does. I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of weird. It applies that like little effect, and like when they vent, I steal their ether or something. It's really weird. I just wouldn't use it. It's not that strong. Use something else, please. Next up, we have Stone. Stone makes your weapon look ugly. It applies like a stone effect to it. It makes it look like a piece of rock. But what it does is it makes you have increased posture, which means that Potato Feud hold block. It means that I will block break Potato more quickly than usual. See, normally that wouldn't have block broken him. Wowie wowie. It just increases posture. Yeah. So what Storm does is it applies stun and deals 17.5% more damage on your first hit, and then it puts on a 5-second cooldown. Then the first hit after that cooldown does the same thing. With Surge Path, it does something slightly different, just deals a bit more damage and like strikes your opponent with lightning. But all around, it's a pretty good enchant, and it looks kind of drippy. What Stormbreaker, this is Stormbreaker. What Stormbreaker does is it does what Storm does, but if there's constant rain, so it does a good bit of damage, but the weird thing that it does is it changes your critical to throwing your weapon at your opponent, and then it brings it back and strikes them with lightning, and it in theory I feel like it should be cool, like, and the effect looks cool, but it isn't really that good. I would rather have my critical. You can still parry during this time, but I would rather just have my normal critical. All around, I wouldn't use it. Next up, we have the Tears of Edenkite enchant. What this enchant does is it applies a blue effect with like these like white and a little bit black effects going on it and these bubbles. It's pretty cool. And what it does is that on critical, it shoots bubbles at your opponent. Wowie wowie. They deal a lot of damage. Yeah, it's really strong. They are parryable, however, but they do deal good damage. So I would say it's a pretty strong enchant, especially if your weapon has a good critical. It also applies the effect on Flourish, as I will now demonstrate on my test subject. Wow, more bubbles. See? And he parried one of them. What Umbral Knight does is it's like a poor man's Astral. It applies this blue effect on the weapon itself, and then like black and red effects of particles. What it does is on the first hit, it will have that little red X mark come up, and that will deal 20% of the weapon's damage. Then it puts it on a 5-second cooldown, and then after that 5-second cooldown, first hit after it, makes that little red X appear, and then does the 20% more damage. And this effect only happens on M1, does not happen on critical. So what Vampirism does is it makes you heal for 20% of the damage you deal. So when I hit him, I heal. When I hit him, I heal. When I hit him, I heal. Wowie wow. It's pretty strong. It doesn't work against some bosses. I wouldn't really use it for like boss fighting, but since it's not affected by PvE scaling, but it's really strong for surviving in ganks. Also, Vampirism applies a pink effect. Next up, we have a controversial enchant, Wild. It makes the weapon like just normal colored, but with like white effects coming around from it. What this does is it makes your weapon deal area of effect damage in like a circle like this big around it, around your target, spreading out and dealing less damage the further away from the target it is. I personally hate this enchant. I think it sucks and I would never use it, but some people absolutely love it, so maybe it's user's choice. This is first enchant is the Curse of Yunshul, which first makes your weapon disappear, and when you don't have it drawn, and when you do have it drawn, it makes it almost invisible. But Curse of Yunshul, percent of max health, it makes you deal that percent more damage, but it has a chance to make you lose 7% of your max health, but deal a lot more damage on that hit. It's kind of weird, but it's pretty cool that it becomes invisible. You can wipe to losing all of your HP to it. Kind of risky, but kind of cool because you deal more damage. Next, we have Bloodthirsty. Curse the Bloodthirsty, which makes you deal 1.1 times damage, so 10% extra damage. Deals more blood damage, which is good for killing your opponent sometime, and it makes your blood damage scale with your weapon damage. But when you miss an attack, like I'm about to do, you lose blood. By the way, dodging, parrying, and blocking don't count as a miss, but it's all around decent, depending on the build. Next, we have Curse of the Unbidden. It should drain ether from your target. Maybe it's draining from him, I don't know. And then it replaces your critical attack with a counter. That looks kind of weird. I have never run the counter successfully work. We're gonna try right now. Oh, it did work. It did work. Okay. It briefly stuns your opponent, the counter, and gives you invincibility frames. Let's show it one more time. So I could land a hit. It's okay. It's kind of weird. Never use it in PvE because I know it does not work. Maybe if you want to make a cheese build, use it. Knock yourself out. I'm personally going to stay away from it. Last but certainly not least, we have NLK. This is a big one. So as you can see right now, my health bar is not stained, but when I equip NLK, it makes my health bar stained. So first off, this will mean that you go to the depths after PvE. Doesn't change it in PvP. But what this does is it makes you regen passively while you have it held. Makes you take 2 times blood from all damage in the overworld, only in the overworld though, and every M1 makes your opponent add 2% insanity. So technically, after 50 M1s, you should kill them from insanity. The downside of this is whenever you lose all your sanity, you instantly die. And when you're in the depths, you lose 2 sanity per second you have it held. So don't use it in the depths unless you're like hankering to die. This weapon, this enchant is good for the passive regen, and sometimes good if you're trying to make your opponent go completely mentally insane. Alrighty guys, and that was every enchant in Deepwoken besides pesky little Harrowing. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe in that corner right over there. I'd really appreciate it if you would comment what y'all think I should do next. I'm always open to ideas. If you need a build to farm medallions to these crazy cool enchants, check out this progression video over here on the left. And with that, have a great day, night, or whatever time it is you're watching this, and I will see all of you lovely people in the next one. Bye!